The Old Testament reading is 1 Samuel chapter 3, beginning with the first verse. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down within the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. And the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for thy servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood forth, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for thy servant hears." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the two ears of every one that hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end, that I am about to punish his house forever." Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." And Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Faces of faith. We see the face of Samuel, the miracle child. It takes a while to figure it out, but he's the one at the end of the day who shows us what prayer really is about. Prayer for Samuel isn't so much, "Oh Lord, hear my prayer," right? But instead, his prayer is, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Do we dare to listen? I've told you many times what Elie Wiesel said, that if an angel ever says, "Be not afraid, you better look out, a big assignment is on the way." Are we ready to hear big assignments? Or I think about Marianne Williamson, who said you invite God into your life. You think, oh, God's going to come in and touch things up a little, like an interior decorator. But instead, you invite God into your life, you look out the window one day, and there's a wrecking ball. God's going to take the whole thing down. It's rotten down to the foundations. You got to start over. We see the face of the miracle child Samuel, and then we see the face of Eli, who's not aged well, old face. It says the word of the Lord was rare. A lot of that is on Eli. Eli, so interesting. Eli's face is the face of a broken family, disappointment in family. He carries this around. It's a huge weight. He had great dreams for his sons that they would be holy priests who would follow in his footsteps, but they severely disappointed him. They have no regard for the Lord. Eli has to bear that cross. Eli's face is the face of frailty. His face is the face of exhaustion. It's interesting. I heard my friend, our former pastor here, George Ragsdale, preach on this passage a few months ago, and he talked about this thing with Eli. He's got the frailty and the exhaustion, and how frailty and exhaustion can actually make it hard for us to hear from God. It's like when you think you need to hear from God, you're frail and you're exhausted, but actually that very frailty and exhaustion makes it hard to hear from God, hard to act on what God might ask you to do. And George also said this that I think is absolutely spot on, is that Eli comes to be aware that God is calling young Samuel, and we could sympathize with him if he were reticent about this and didn't really want Samuel to hear a word from God. The reason being is that if Samuel actually hears some new word from the Lord, that might be the end of what Eli has been about. It might be the end of what Eli has assumed is the word of the Lord's way in the world, that might actually be undone. He has cause to be suspicious, but yet he encourages Samuel to hear God's word. Eli, we might say, is aging poorly. I told a friend the other day, I said, part of my sermon Sunday is going to be, I'm going to say, try to talk about aging well. My friend said, it's too late for you, dude. So I didn't appreciate it. It's not over, still aging, got some time ahead. We're all aging, right? And if you're 20 or if you're 60 or whatever you are, like, how do you age well? It flies by in a nanosecond, doesn't it? And I thought about this. How do you age poorly? How do you age well? The aging poorly. I told some of you this story before, but it seemed to bear repeating. 3 years ago, 3 of my buddies and I decided to tailgate at a football game. We're going to be like college guys again. We had great ambitions. We planned, and we got there. We put out our table and our tent. We got our drinks and our snacks. And we were so cool, and we even got supported in this, because this co-ed from another tailgate, she wanders up to us, and she says, guys, I've got some gummy bears that are soaked in vodka. And we were like, we are killing tailgating. Like, we're amazing. We're young again, but then it broke down. Because what happened is, as we continued to talk, I don't know, I noticed, like, one of my friends said, my orthopedist says this about my back trouble, and somebody said, well, my urologist tells me this. Somebody says, well, my urologist tells me that, and I said, we are flunking tailgating. We're not aging well. What aging well looks like is this, I think. I had the good grace when I lived up in Davidson. I had a new neighbor. He was 90 when I met him. His name is, some of you may have known him, Reverend Claude Broach. He was for decades the senior pastor at St. John's Baptist Church down near Presbyterian Hospital. Wonderful, wonderful, regal man. It was such a blessing to me as a young man to get to be friends with him. Claude was amazing. He was brilliant, he was a theologian, but he always wanted to know the latest and the greatest and the newest. He was always learning new things, open. It was incredible. And I remember the week that he was diagnosed. They told him that he would die within a week, 10 days. So I went over to see Claude. His family was gathered there, and they were doing what families do in such situations. They were talking about everything except his illness and death. They were talking about the weather. They were talking about lunch, and that's what people do, right? But I broke into that, and I said, Claude, they tell me you're going to die here within about a week. I said, how do you feel about that? He said, I'll never forget it. He said, I am curious. I am curious. I said, I'm curious what dying will be like. He said, I'm also curious. He said, all my life I've thought and believed these things about God and eternal life and so on. I'm curious to see if is that really how it is? What's that like? I'm curious. And it occurred to me that's the way to age. I want to age like him. I want to be always curious. What happens with the Elis of the world, and actually many of us, is our curiosity breaks down. Something happens, we make a few gains in the world, and we've kind of made it, and then we retrench, we protect, we begin to conserve what we have. There's so many people that I know, as they age, they become, I don't know what to call them. I call them ex-idealists, right? Ex-activists, ex-naive open people, I don't know what, just add their X's, right? They begin to protect things, and they aren't the person that they used to be. I think this has happened to Eli. Sometimes this happens in the realm of religion, right? When you're young, you're kind of learning, but then you learn about God, and you're going to protect God and protect the Bible and protect the church. I love the movie, The Book of Eli. Denzel Washington plays this character who it's a dystopian thing, but he's got like the one Bible left in the world, and he's protecting it forever. But what happens is he's protecting this Bible, but he in the course of the story, he becomes a mean person. And here's what he says when he realizes this. He said, I got so caught up in protecting it, the book, this Bible, I got so caught up in protecting it, I forgot to live by what I'd learned from it. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes we're going to protect the Bible, we're going to protect God, we're going to protect the church. We forget what we learned from it. Like, what is it about? Anyway, Michael Curry at the royal wedding, he talked about this old world passing away, and God is doing a new thing. There's a new world that is dawning. The question is, are we ready for this new world? As Glenn read from 1 Samuel 3, the new thing that God is doing, it will cause the ears of everyone that hears it to tingle. I love that. What's the new thing? What is God calling us to? How do we age well? What is God about to do? You'd think the elder would be the ones who could figure that out, because we've been around forever and we should have wisdom, but too often we're the ones that miss it because we get crusty and we're protecting our turf and we're doing all of that. And so sometimes we have to turn to the young to know what God's new thing is. Jesus, after all, said, unless you become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of God. Jesus says, unless you welcome a child, you'll miss out on the kingdom of God. Every time I can, I try to talk to young people, children, confirmands, teenagers, young adults, just about life and church and their dreams and what they think about issues of the day. It's actually interesting when you talk to young people, like if you say, what's your dream for the church? They absolutely never say, my dream for the church is that we'll keep coming and sitting rigidly in these pews forever. They just never say that. It's interesting, isn't it? What they dream of is a church that is relevant, and we're out of the building, and we're doing amazing creative things, we're kind of shocking the world out there. That's what young people say they dream. For the church, it's not a place to come to and become a fossil over time. Young people, what do they want? How do they think about the issues of the day? It changes your perspective. Anybody who's been a parent knows you have that moment that comes, you're driving around town and there's a homeless person, and your kids say, who is that? And you try to describe, that's a homeless person, and your child inevitably says, well, they could come live with us. And you have your reasons. Well, old people, that's what we do. Children look at a problem like homelessness and think, well, that seems fixable. Isn't that interesting, that naivete? Kate Murphy, who's the pastor at the Grove up in Northeast Charlotte, she had an op-ed in the paper the other day that I thought was pretty interesting. She was talking about this new immigration policy. I don't know if you've read about it. It's a new immigration policy that says to deter illegal immigration, what they're going to do is they're going to separate parents from their children. Right? Now, that may be brilliant immigration policy. I don't know. But if you were to ask children, what do you think of this idea of separating parents from their children? The children would shudder and say, that's just the worst idea ever. If you talk to the young who might hear what God has to say. Homosexuality, our denomination, the United Methodist Church, we've been trying to figure it out all my adult lifetime. Homosexuality, we have a big conference coming up next year. The church may wind up splitting over this thing. And there are different viewpoints. I have great respect for viewpoints all over the map on homosexuality and same-gender marriage and so on. But there's an interesting fact that enters into this thing that I don't think anybody can really get away from, and that's this. The number of young people who are outside the church, who are just waiting for the church to condemn LGBTQ people, and then we'll come into the church. If you just condemn them, then we'll come into the church. That number of people out there is zero. But there's actually a large number of young adults out there that they don't want to have anything to do with the church because the church has had a history of condemning people that they know and love. Guns. Everybody's got their opinions about guns, but it's kind of interesting when you talk to young people about guns. You see, they have to live with it, don't they? The shootings happen in schools. They have lockdown drills in schools. And so young people want a fundamentally different equation around guns. Older people, they've just kind of adjusted to it and said, oh, it's just the way it is. I had a friend recently, he's older than I am. And he just said that's just the way it is in a free country. Like, that's just the way it is in a free country. Really? Is that the best that we can do? Is God going to do a new thing? How do we age? I want to age with curiosity. I want to age with the way children approach things. I want to age with that kind of naivete. I don't want to be an ex-idealist. God doesn't call us to surrender our idealism, our faith, our giddy excitement about what God will do next. It's always about curiosity. We have a Bible study group in this church. This group of women, they've been meeting longer than I've been your pastor, and that's been 15 years. And they invited me to come to their group, 3 years ago or so. And so I sat down and I said, tell me about your group. You've been meeting all this time. And they said, we've been meeting all these years, and we know way less now than when we started. And I said, perfect. That's the goal. Right, you start off, you think you got God kind of figured out, but then you learn more and you realize, oh, that was actually incorrect. And I have a new question. And you get that question answered, but then hidden inside that, there are 3 new questions. And then you look at those questions and, there are more questions. And that's actually the great delight of it all. That's how relationships ought to happen, right? Is anybody like they got you all figured out? Like, nobody likes that. They want you to continue to get to know them, to know you're changing. So how do we remain curious? How do we remain open? Whatever new thing that God might do. In the book of Eli, I love this other moment in the movie. Eli, the Denzel Washington figure, he's been walking around with his Bible for 30 years. And Solara, who's played by Mila Kunis, asks him, did you ever think you were lost? He says, nope. She said, how do you know you're walking in the right direction? He said, I walk by faith, not by sight. She asked, what does that mean? He says, it means that you know something even if you don't know something. It means that you know something even if you don't know something. Curiosity. How are we aging? How do we come to the Lord's table today? I think there's only one question to ask as we come to the Lord's table today, and that question is, are you still hungry? Are you still hungry?
Hey, thank you for watching, and we hope you got something out of that. If you have any feedback for us, any response that was helpful to you, we would love to hear that. Please let us know. And everything that we put out is free, and we want it to be that way, but if you're able and feel led to support the mission of our church or the cost of providing this online content, here's how to do so.